The Supreme Court okays Christian prayer at government meetings. Barbra Streisand's sister does a cabaret act. The vote to exclude JStreet, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. One of the most important decisions in recent years on religious liberty in the United States as it affects the Jewish community was delivered Monday by the Supreme Court. It is now officially legal to lead legislative sessions with prayer, even if it is almost always Christian prayer throughout the United States. The case was decided by a 5-4 vote. All three Jewish justices, Stephen Breyer, Elena Kagan, and Ruth Ginsburg, voted against the decision. The three Jewish justices are also seen as among the more liberal justices on the nation's highest court. They were joined in their dissent by the fourth liberal on the court, Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Justice Anthony Kennedy, writing for the majority, spoke specifically to the idea of Christian prayer as permissible in writing, quote, "They may have invoked, e.g., the name of Jesus, but they also invoked universal themes, e.g., by calling for a spirit of cooperation. Absent a pattern of prayers that over time denigrate, proselytize, or betray an impermissible government purpose, a challenge based solely on the content of a particular prayer will not likely establish a constitutional violation." The court case was about the town of Greece, New York, which has a population of 94,000. The monthly town board meetings there used to begin with a moment of silence until 1999, when the new town supervisor began inviting local clergy to deliver an invocation. The legislature invited all clergy members nearby to give the invocation, but in Kennedy's words, quote, "Nearly all of the congregations in town were Christian, and from 1999 to 2007, all of the participating ministers were too." Among the universal themes and prayers would be lines that spoke quite directly to Christian beliefs. One such prayer included these lines: "We look with anticipation to the celebration of Holy Week and Easter. It is in the solemn events of next week that we find the very heart and center of our Christian faith. We acknowledge the saving sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. We draw strength, vitality, and confidence from his resurrection at Easter." The plaintiffs in the lawsuit, Susan Galloway and Linda Stevens, didn't like what they were hearing at these meetings, complaining that they were, quote, "offensive, quote, intolerable, and inconsistent with, quote, a diverse community." They sued in 2008, requesting that prayer sessions not be halted, but that they be, quote, "inclusive and ecumenical," and refer only to a, quote, "generic God." Galloway is Jewish, and Stevens is an atheist. After Galloway's original complaint, a handful of clergy from other faiths delivered invocations in the coming years, including Jewish, Baha'i, and Wiccan clergy. But still, the prayers and prayer practices okayed by the Supreme Court this week were overwhelmingly Christian. The dissenting opinion was drafted by Elena Kagan. Kagan wrote in part that, quote, "No one can fairly read the prayers from Greece's town meetings as anything other than explicitly Christian, constantly and exclusively so. The prayers betray no understanding that the American community is today, as it long has been, a rich mosaic of religious faiths." Kagan went on to declare, quote, "The monthly chaplains appear almost always to assume that everyone in the room is Christian. No one has thought even to assure attending members of the public that they need not participate in the prayer session." And this is where one can understand the novelty of this new decision from the Supreme Court. Kennedy's majority opinion speaks of, quote, "prayer opportunities," a term coined in earlier Supreme Court decisions, specifically on the issue of legislative prayer. The main prior decision was 1983's March v. Chambers, which explicitly said that legislative prayer is to be allowed because it's been the case in the United States throughout much of its history. However, that 1983 decision explicitly said that prayers may not be those that are, quote, "advancing or disparaging a particular religion." In order to make that notion jibe with the idea of these very Christian prayers in the town of Greece, Kennedy suggests that the government, having these prayer opportunities, may not then intervene to demand that the prayers be non-sectarian. He wrote, quote, "To hold that invocations must be non-sectarian would force the legislatures that sponsor prayers and the courts that are asked to decide these cases to act as supervisors and censors of religious speech." In other words, Kennedy is saying that the government, having established a time for prayer, may not then go and intervene to determine the kind of prayer allowed, because it would be that latter intervention, not the establishment of prayer sessions in the first place, that would have the government establishing religion. In other news of how the Jewish world interacts with the government, the most concentrated group of Jewish organizational leaders voted not to allow a liberal Israel lobbying group as a member last week. The Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations has existed since the 1950s as a way for dozens of Jewish organizations to speak with a collective voice to the American government and other bodies. JStreet, the left-wing group founded in 2008 to lobby on Israel, sought entrance as one of the members. In a vote last week, the membership of the Conference of Presidents chose not to admit JStreet. The vote was reportedly 22-17, with 3 abstentions and 8 not present. With the vote not to admit JStreet, the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, has called for changes to the conference and threatened potential withdrawal by the reform movement if these changes don't occur. But when it comes to getting admitted to a club of a different sort, a performer perhaps best known as Barbra Streisand's sister, Rosalind Kind, has a new cabaret act. Meredith Gansman has that story.
Driving down this road I've driven 20,000 times. There's so much that I've never seen before.
Thank goodness Rosalind Kind did not pursue her aptitude for math and become a teacher. Instead, an admitted introvert, she came out of her shell and found her voice, in part because of her older sister, Barbra Streisand.
It was her example that made me realize something that I really wanted.
Streisand is Kind's half-sister from her mother's first marriage and often served as a role model from afar, becoming famous for roles in I Can Get It For You Wholesale and Funny Girl by the time Kind was just in grade school.
I was very proud. There were times I kind of, where I wanted it, my big sister, I kind of lost her to the world.
Though Kind is not as famous as her half-sister, she ultimately did get her own career in show business, working in film, television, and on stage, mostly, though, in Los Angeles.
Barbara's sister. Close enough, same DNA.
It's really interesting just to see the familial resemblance. A lot of her gesticulations, a lot of her vocal inflections. There's that interesting kind of similarity in performance style that is really cool to see.
So recently performing at 54 Below in New York was a long overdue homecoming for this Brooklyn native.
It was something I had to do to come home.
It was just really exciting to us to have her here after not having performed in New York for 20 years. So we always get really excited about artists who had a cabaret following in the past and who we think could just have a great comeback.
What's never left is Kind's appreciation for her Jewish heritage.
Well, you know, my parents always felt that you needed to know your roots and know where you came from. My first school was a yeshiva. I went to Yeshiva Rambam on Kings Highway.
To see more from Rosalind Kind, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. A new film explores the horrors perpetrated by Dr. Joseph Mengele, as Christian Needon reports.
The southern Patagonia region of Argentina holds great beauty and some dark secrets. And a new film tells the story of an evil man who takes refuge in this isolated corner of the world.
Puedo pagar por adelantado.
The German Doctor recently opened in the U.S. with a title that refers to Nazi SS officer Joseph Mengele, who here is hiding in 1960 Patagonia and ingratiating himself to an unsuspecting family. The Jewish Channel spoke with director Lucia Puenzo about her film based on her own novel.
Mengele has always been for me since I was a teenager, a character that intrigued me and repelled me and all his perversion and his fanatism in Latin America, no? Because he was there for almost 30 years hiding in Argentina, in Paraguay, in Brazil.
That fact adds a layer of intrigue to this Argentinian production, which was the country's official submission to the 2014 Academy Awards. But it is grounded in Puenzo's literary vision, which tells the story through the eyes of a teenage protagonist.
When I began to write the novel that is called Huacolda, the original name is a Mapuche name, I was actually more intrigued by the family and by this teenager that becomes completely fascinated with this German man than by Mengele.
That more personal approach gives actor Alex Brendemuel's German Doctor a more haunting presence than other portrayals of Mengele. Perhaps the most famous one is Gregory Peck's version in The Boys from Brazil, released to theaters mere months before Mengele's 1979 drowning in Brazil. The man known as the Angel of Death had evaded capture for decades.
And I never understood how he could do it. No, he had the Mossad, the Israeli agency, almost getting him, but they never did.
The film portrays one of the big reasons that Mengele escaped capture for so long. To see more about Lucia Puenzo's new film, The German Doctor, please tune in to the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Finally this week, the website Jezebel has become famous for its novel takes on feminism and coverage of women. The philosophy of that site has now been concentrated into a book that's an encyclopedia of sorts on today's American woman's experience, The Book of Jezebel. I interview the site's founding editor and the book's editor, Anna Holmes, in this week's episode of Up Close. But speaking about new women's experiences, there's nothing newer than a newborn baby. And where traditionally American Jewish families had only produced rituals for welcoming new Jewish baby boys into the world, a growing effort now seeks to have a similar experience for new Jewish baby girls. Also in this week's episode of Up Close, I interview Sharon Siegel, author of A Jewish Ceremony for Newborn Girls. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Anna Holmes. One of the things, if there's a theme to Jezebel.com, the site, if there's a theme to the Book of Jezebel, this idea that so frequently women's issues or women's concerns are addressed in this kind of flippant manner.
The genesis of the site and what you'll see on the site and what you'll see in the book is a kind of pushback against things that women have traditionally been valued for, which is like their appearance, their sexuality, their fertility, whether they are mothers. That's the way that the media, women's media had traditionally presented women's interests as being kind of that myopic and narrow, when in fact it's a lot broader. So you'll see references to things that one would consider superficial, I suppose, in the book or on the site, but you'll also see references to historical figures and politics in general, and pop culture.
It's interesting, for example, when looking through the book, and obviously there are a great many entries within it. It's kind of an encyclopedia of I don't know, your
like
view, your site sensibility. Yeah. And then one of the things that's constantly running through my head is, well, what got left out?
Oh, so many things got left out. Some things got left out because I didn't think of them. I mean, I literally, they just didn't cross my mind. And some things got left out because we didn't have room. But one of the things I knew when the book came out was that people were going to hopefully like it, but also point out the things that we'd missed, things or people that we'd missed, which they have, and I've been making a list.
Right, but what about what's consciously removed? What's consciously outside the sphere of Jezebel?
What's consciously removed?
Like, what are the kinds of things that when you talk about it, you go, you know what, that's just not what we're about?
Well, a couple of things. And this is really more about when I was running the site, and I think that it translates into the book. But there were certain things I was not really interested in talking about on the site. I was not really interested in talking about the Republican or right-wing point of view. The site was very unapologetically progressive. You can call it liberal, pro-choice. I was not interested in presenting opposing views about, let's say, abortion rights or reproductive justice. I wasn't really interested in presenting opposing views with regards to the political system, or at least kind of the ways that we lean. I wasn't that particularly interested in featuring male point of views that often. Like, I didn't have any male writers, because I felt that you could get the male point of view pretty much anywhere else, on the internet or in print, and that the site was not designed to have fair and balanced debates about certain issues that we felt were non-negotiable. For example, abortion. So I don't want to say that it was supposed to be a safe space for women, because it certainly wasn't safe at all. There were a lot of things that we published that irritated outsiders and irritated insiders, the readers. But there were certain concessions I was not willing to make.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.